Hello everyone, this is Sarah Christensen here from Therap. We also have Jeremy Gibson joining us for today's webinar. So today's session is going to focus on the activity tracking section. Activity tracking is one of the administrative roles and capabilities within Therap, so we're going to do kind of a deep dive into that section and look at the different things that you can do within activity tracking. In addition to activity tracking, we're also going to look a bit at some kind of related areas. So we'll look at the update histories and archives, and we'll spend a bit of time also looking at SCOM message audit. So that's our agenda for today. If this is your first time joining one of these, go ahead and start with just a little bit of housekeeping. If you've joined one of these before, you've probably heard this, but all of these webinars, attendees come in listen-only mode, so that just means that everybody is muted by default. We prefer that if you have questions, you can go ahead and type them into the questions panel. So I'll be presenting today, and as I'm doing that, Jeremy will be taking questions and responding to them. If Jeremy gets a question from one of you guys that we possibly want to highlight to the whole group, we may go ahead and do that as well. So definitely ask questions throughout the presentation as you have them, just by using the questions panel. All right, so we'll go ahead and get into this. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm in my Therap account now. I'm in a demo account. And the first thing I'm going to show you guys is just how to get access to the activity tracking section. So activity tracking can be used for monitoring various user actions in the system. And access to that is driven by having a specific user privilege assigned to you within your administrative roles. So activity tracking has its own access right that is designed specifically for that. So if you have access to that role, that's what gives you a section on your admin tab labeled activity tracking. So to get into activity tracking, you would click View. So we'll start now just kind of looking at the different things that are available here to filter by. So one of the things when you're in activity tracking that you could filter by is maybe you want to see all of the activity within a certain location. So for example, if I want to see all of the forms submitted through Columbia 24-hour residential services, I can type that in. And as you saw, when I started typing, this is one of those situations where I'm selecting a match. By default, you're going to have a date range going a week back. And so if I just leave that in, go down and search, I'm going to see all the activity within the last week that occurred associated with that program. Now, that's not necessarily going to mean that every single action that a user does while they're at, maybe this is actually a physical site. If they're at that site, not every action necessarily is tied to a program site. Something like logging in, for example, that has nothing to do with a program. So it's only things that would be associated with the program. Another thing I could filter activity tracking by would be a user. And so this is also one of those that is a search, meaning if I want to see all of the activity that Katie completed, I've searched for her, selected her. Okay, and so now I'm seeing all the actions she has recently completed. Okay. You also have the login name field. So this would be if you actually know the user's login name that you want to monitor activity for, as opposed to searching for them by their actual name. Kind of similar situation with a program site. So for this one, this is a text field. So basically anything that matches what I enter here is how I would be filtering. So maybe I have a few different things that are operating out of the Main Street site. So if I do a search here, let's see. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 Main Street program on all of these, but if I have something else with Main Street in the name, that would show up as well, or Main. Okay. Your date range within activity tracking is limited to 1 month. So by default, like I said, it just goes about a week back. It can search for up to 1 month. So if I search for more than that, it's going to give me an error message and tell me that I need to narrow down my search range to less than or equal to 1 month. And then I'm going to be able to get those records. Okay, and then this section, you're able to filter out by module. So you can say that you want to see, specifically everything associated with case notes or everything dealing with document storage. Okay. Once you select a module here, I'll go ahead and go with tlog, and notice I can type in to filter this list as well. Then it generates a list of actions. So you don't actually have the ability to select actions on here until you type out or select which module that you want to work with. And so these are the different actions that might take place within tlogs. The activity type, so that can be related to a module, but such as PDF being downloaded, you could download a PDF that's stored within a module. But many of these don't specifically relate to a module, so like a login failure or logging into the system, for example. And so you'll see this list just remains consistent. Form ID would be if I want to track activity on a specific form. So in order to do that, you just go ahead and grab a form ID. So I'll just pull this tlog here. And when I go to the top of the tlog, I can click on the information icon and then just go ahead and copy that form ID. Then when I go into activity tracking, I'll go to the form ID field and just paste that in. I'm going to go ahead and expand my date range just a little bit. I didn't actually catch when that was submitted. I guess it had to be within the past week since it's on my to-do list. Okay, and so I can see right here, I was just viewing that tlog, right? So that activity was captured. You guys can see my IP address, the time that activity took place, and this is going to show based on the account's time. So even though I'm in Mountain Time, this account is within Central Time. Okay, you'll see the server, the module, the action. This doesn't have an activity type, so this only has an action associated with it. You'll see the form ID. You'll also see the individual form ID. So the individual form ID is actually the form ID that's on the top of the individual data form for the person that this tlog was pertaining to. So you will never see the actual individual's name in this section. It's strictly going to show you the individual form ID. Any actions that are associated with a program site are going to have that program site show up here. You might see comments. So for this particular example, there are no comments, but certain types of actions will contain comments. And then you'll see the time zone that is reflected over here. So it's not, I think my user time zone is that as well. So these are the only actions that have taken place so far with this tlog. So it was submitted by Kristen. I viewed it. I didn't acknowledge it yet, so that's not captured, right? When you're in the search results, I only have a couple, but if I wanted to filter this in any way, for example, I want to go ahead and type Kristen's login name. Any of the text down here, it can be used in the filter up top. So if I wanted to filter it by just submitting actions, for example, that's another thing I could do. Okay. At the bottom, you will see the option to export the results out to Excel, which I won't do in this case, but I'll show you for some of the other things in activity tracking. And I can either click back, or if I want to start my search from scratch, start an entirely new search, then I have the new search option. So the individual form ID, it kind of mentions that. I'll go ahead and show you how you would get that individual form ID. So this could be used if you wanted to monitor all actions that related to a specific individual's record. So there are many different ways you can get to the individual data form. I'm going to go ahead and go from the individual home page of the person and then go to their individual data form from here. So here at the top of the individual data form, I've got it highlighted right now. Here's the form ID. So what I would need to do is highlight that form ID, then copy it. And then when I go back to my dashboard, if I go into the admin tab, go into my activity tracking section, then I can paste the form ID here. So I'll go ahead and go back a bit further, just because we can. Okay. And then when I do my search, again, the action that I just completed shows up, and I can see, okay, I was on the individual home page for the person. And earlier I was working with the individual support plan for this individual, so you can see that I downloaded a PDF, I acknowledged a change form, I viewed the plan, and so forth. So you're able to see all those actions. Down at the bottom, it tells me how many total entries there are. You may have noticed in our release notes that we did have a change with how many entries are available at one time. So most of the modules in Therap, I'll take T-logs as an example maybe. So if well, hopefully I have enough to illustrate my point here, but if I do a search for all the T-logs from a particular date range, there we go. I get this message at the top that tells me the first 100 records matching your search criteria are shown here. Please note that export to Excel link at the bottom contains the full report. So most places in the system, when you do a search or run in a report, it's showing you on the screen a certain number of records, but you're able to export more than that. Activity tracking is an exception to that rule. So if I get a certain number of entries and I get that type of message at the top, basically what I have here is what I have available. Previously, up until just a couple of days ago, the limit was 1,000 records at one time. So that was all that you could view or export. The same rule applied to both. Over the update that we did this weekend, that number has been expanded to 10,000. And so hopefully that should be helpful to people who use activity tracking quite a bit and want to do maybe some more comprehensive searches. Definitely still, especially depending on the size of an agency, it's not like you can just do a totally open-ended search and get everything. Especially if you're trying to search for a full month of activity, you'd be surprised how quickly these actions add up. Just because so many different things are being tracked in here. Every time somebody views a form or goes to the individual home page, there's just so many different actions that can take place. So definitely when you're working with inactivity tracking, it's important to be mindful of those limits and filter your search as needed. But I think the 10,000 is a really good enhancement, and hopefully that will be helpful to you guys who are using this section quite a bit. All right, so now we'll get into some specific applications of ways that you might use the activity tracking section. One thing that I find pretty helpful in here is the fact that you can monitor login failures. So when somebody gets a login failure, often that can be a very frustrating experience for the user. Maybe they're very sure that they entered their password correctly. They think there's a glitch with the system. So this just kind of gives you the backup of showing maybe why that login failure took place. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll extend this couple days further back just so hopefully I can get something. Okay. Oh, Jeremy, we've got to call you out. So we have a password mismatch here. So you can see in the comments what the reason for the login failure it was. Um, so, maybe it's not. Maybe the user is not active, right? So there are a couple showing that that's the case. But the vast majority of these are due to a password mismatch. So that can be a really helpful thing, just to know that you have that backup and you can show that. Something to consider with those login failures, though, is if the person is not using the correct login name or provider code, that actually does not get reflected in activity tracking. So, if it's a login name they're using that's not on your list of login names, then it basically just doesn't register that as being associated with your account. Or if they have the wrong provider code, of course, there's no way you're going to see that. So that is something to keep in mind. If there's no record of the login attempt, that could be the case. Okay. You can also monitor logons. I have seen people use this. You have to do definitely some Excel fancy stuff that I'm not going to really get into today, but I've seen people take logons and then log offs or session expirations to see how long people are spending in the system. So that was kind of an interesting usage of this. But when you do the log on, you can see some information about the device. So Jeremy logged in from his phone. It's got people logging in from a standard browser. Okay, so you can see those things in the comments. Something else I've seen the login action used to monitor is specifically looking at IP addresses. So if your agency does everything kind of more facility-based, you're not doing community-based services where the IP address may change just by design, and your policy is that people should only log in from a specific location. Something that you may choose to do is have like a list of what those IP addresses are that are acceptable. And then you can download your activity tracking to Excel and compare what has actually been used for the logins and what your list of acceptable options are. So that's definitely another idea for how you can work with just those basic activity types. Okay. PDFs being downloaded, or data being exported to Excel. Those are other things that agencies might choose to monitor. So, maybe you have a policy that data should only be exported from agency devices or something like that. So that could be something that you choose to go in and monitor. Okay. All right. So those are just kind of some general user activity things. Next thing I want to talk about is the provider admin things you can monitor. So this would actually be actions that admins take. So if I select provider administration, there are several things such as updating user privileges, updating super roles, dealing with program enrollments and discharges. So this could be something that you regularly check. I'm going to look at user privilege updates and see if we had any of those recently. Yeah, so something that you can see when you're monitoring user privilege updates, you'll see the login name of the user who did the update. And then the nice thing is you will also see the affected users. So if you have policies in place regarding, user privilege updates and what this should be used for, who should be updating whose privileges, this might be helpful to you. So most of the things on the admin tab would be found when you select the module as provider administration, and then you can dig into the actions. Some things will have their own, so like sign up agreement, and that is because in addition to creating and updating and so forth, we want to be able to monitor the agree, disagree aspect of that. One kind of exception to the admin thing is the user section. So this gets into some of that things with two-factor authentication. I'm not sure if any of you guys are aware of or using that, but all these OTP things are related to that. And then our new self-password reset feature has a couple of actions that can be monitored here as well. So here you could actually see maybe you've enabled that for people, but you want to see who is actually going in and configuring that new feature. Going in and entering their information through the settings tab and such. So that could be helpful as well. Okay. Next, let's get into some specific modules. I'm going to pause for 1 second. Just need to close my Excel. Okay. All right. So let's look at the ISP data section. So if I select ISP data, I can monitor that people are viewing, saving, updating, or deleting. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just complete an open-ended search. And because this is a demo account and we don't have too many people entering stuff into this, I'm actually able to get everything, it looks like, so 334 entries. So I'm going to go ahead and export this to Excel now and open this up. Okay. So here is what the search results look like in Excel. I do have to go ahead and enable editing to work with this. So something I might do with activity tracking data is put it into a pivot table to make sense of this. I have over 300 entries, so I'm going to want some kind of way to organize it. So if I click pivot table at the top left corner of my insert tab, then I can go ahead and click OK. And then this brings me into being able to build a pivot table. With activity tracking, typically your values that we would instruct you to use when developing a pivot table anywhere else would be the form ID. Actually, what works as a unique identifier for activity tracking is the activity time. So if I put activity time in there, you saw that we had 334 entries. Let me make this bigger for you. So if I check that and it looks okay, that means that each of these is being counted as its own unique thing. So I'm going to go ahead and see generally what actions are being completed with ISP data. So mostly ISP data is being saved. This is interesting. So I can see we had 47 updates for ISP data entries, and 82 were viewed. So different agencies have different ways of working with ISP data, but many may instruct their staff to, in addition to recording ISP data, to view the ISP data recorded by their peers. So I would actually expect if people are doing that the number of ISP data entries that were viewed would be higher than the number that were saved. So for each one somebody saves, they may have a few different coworkers who could be going in and viewing that entry. So this just gives you kind of like that overall picture. Something else I could do, just to kind of layer onto that, would be to incorporate login name in some way. So I have added it as a row. I went ahead and stacked it on top. And so B. Sorrels, I can see that this user has saved 4 pieces of ISP data and viewed 1. Calvin has saved 5 and viewed 3, and so forth. So you're able to see how the actions actually break down for a specific user. Okay. You could also do that as a filter. So if I wanted to, I'll go ahead and pick on myself, just look at my own activity. Within that time frame, I saved 8 and just viewed 1. Okay. Take that out. You can also throw things in columns when you're working with pivot tables. Depending on how many users I had, that could be a little unwieldy. But works okay here just because I don't have too many. Okay. So that's one example of how you can export data and use that. Something I am noticing in here, I don't think we had any, let me check. We didn't have any deletions. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. The one where it says blank, that's probably because there was an activity type but not an action. Yep, so I can see 2 of those activity rows represented data being exported to Excel, 2 were downloading a PDF. So typically, or I think pretty much always, when there is an activity type, then there's not an action, and vice versa. It's pretty much one or the other. All right, so I'll go ahead and minimize this. Yeah, so with ISP data, the action types, if I were to go back, see, these are the ones that are available. So view, save, update, and delete. Those are the different actions that I'm able to monitor within ISP data. So anytime you select a particular module, you're able to see what those associated actions are. And the activity types, that would remain consistent. But for something like ISP data, that can be downloaded as a PDF. It can be exported to Excel. So those would be some things we could look at for that. ISP data reports are going to be on here as well. So ISP report is how that's actually categorized. So for those, you can see, are people generating them, viewing them, saving them, and deleting them? So that I think is interesting because a lot of agencies, in my experience, may not necessarily save their ISP data reports. So if your agency doesn't require managers to save them when they generate them, but you want to be able to monitor, that people are generating reports to look at the data on at least a monthly basis, you could use the ISP report option to filter for that. So again, I think this is always easier when you pull it out to Excel, so I'll go ahead and do that again. To give you an example. And I'll go ahead and do a pivot table just because I think it makes it easier. Something I did not do in the last one that I will go ahead and do here is I'll pull in program. So you can see which programs the actions are actually associated with when that's applicable. And then let's look at the different actions. So generating, viewing, saving. And then again, if I wanted to throw in login name as an additional criteria, that's something I could do. So I'll do it as a column. I could also do it as a row. Okay, maybe program as a column. So you can just kind of move things around until you get it in a format that you like. Something I think with ISP data reports, this is a good example, that the ISP data report role, if you give that to somebody, they can view ISP data reports, they can generate ISP data reports, they can save them, and they can delete them. So sometimes when you have situations like that, maybe you want to give somebody that role, but really you wish that they couldn't delete the reports. So when you have those kinds of situations, sometimes it can be helpful to just regularly audit that thing that you don't want people doing. So I could specifically look and see, did anybody delete an ISP data report? And actually, in our account, they did not. And so I could look at who are the actual users doing that and actually dig in from there and see, did they have a valid reason for deleting it? Since, as you know, when you're deleting data, you always have to say, what is the reason for deleting? So I could go look at the report if I did see a deletion and search for it by the form ID. T-logs, something else you can activity track. So T-logs often is something used for communication. Some people use it for daily notes. And so I can track with T-logs if they're being viewed, acknowledged, submitted, updated, or deleted. You can also track if they're being exported to Excel. So I would expect to get quite a lot here. Something I haven't mentioned yet, if you're just viewing data right on the screen, there's a filter up here where I could view up to 100 records just on this screen. So you guys will notice that a lot of different places in Therap. So now I'm seeing more, just directly on the screen. These are not clickable links, by the way, so this is not something you can interact with, but you can copy and paste form IDs from here. So if I noticed something on here and I wanted to look further and I wanted to actually do a search for that T-log, let's see, so this was the 28th, this was viewed. So if I wanted to go in to do a T-log search, I could take that form ID and paste it in here. Okay, and I do have a date range filter on here, so that's definitely going to impact what I'm actually seeing in my search results. Okay. So, let's see, something you could do as far as T-logs, you might see how things break down. Again, kind of similar to what we did with ISP data as far as the actions. So are people just submitting T-logs and they're not actually acknowledging them? So those kinds of things could be helpful to look at. So again, I'll go ahead and say I want to see the actions. So this is generally how they break down across all the users in this time frame. So 1 deletion, 93 submits, 62 acknowledge. So these acknowledge and view numbers seem a little off to me. I might expect that when people are viewing, they're also acknowledging. So that's a little surprising. But again, this is a demo account, so I don't really expect this data to make sense. Again, I can always pull in login name. You don't actually have the username in here, so you do have to go by login name. And then I could see how a specific user's actions break down. So Devin submitted 26, he acknowledged 10. Jeremy acknowledged 15, he submitted 26, viewed 84. So you're able to see, again, specific user activity within a module. Okay. Some modules are going to have more detail than others. So it's good to be aware of kind of what modules have stronger usage and activity tracking than others. So if I look at something like health tracking has all kinds of different forms, appointments, vital signs, and so forth. Some of these, actually, that's interesting. This has comments, this new medication order section that we just added, but a lot of these do not. So this one, I can see somebody viewed the appointments calendar. You can, if you know how the form IDs are organized. Actually, I guess not really for this one. Oh yeah, so this I know just based on the form ID is a medication history, which I think this one, HTA, I think is appointments. So they do actually have some logic to them. If you do a search in the module, you can kind of detect those patterns. But definitely that's not something that's super easy or obvious to figure out. But it is helpful to know if you're looking to investigate some specific thing, perhaps. So those are just some examples of different modules and how activity tracking works within those modules. Certainly I don't have time to go into each individual module, but that gives you just kind of a basic understanding to how you can get to know what is available within a specific module that you may be looking to do activity tracking for. Something else that you could potentially do in here is just look comprehensively at a specific user. So I'll go ahead and pick on myself, and I'm going to look at the whole month of March. And so I did no other filtering other than looking for my login name and a date range. So I have 330 things that I did in March. Most actual users will have more that they do. And so I can use some of the same techniques that I've shown you for the others to dig into what a specific user, in this case myself, what the activity was. So I'm going to do a pivot table, make activity time my value, make it bigger so you can see it. Okay, and so then I can see here are the modules that I worked in this particular account for the month of March. Again, blank means that maybe it was something like logging on that doesn't have a module associated. And then I could look at actions. So within the MAR, here's what I did. I created a new med history and locked the MAR. I approved some MARs. I did some follow-ups. I saved. I viewed. Okay. Actually, that brings up something I want to show with MAR. I've been working in the ISP agenda, ISP programs. Yeah, so you guys can see all the modules I worked on and the different actions I completed. So I could do that. I could also do a different table, maybe looking at some of those things that may not have an associated module. So I logged into this account 29 times. I had one login failure. As a general rule, I do not log out. I let my sessions expire, which is okay because I'm in a demo account and there's no PHI. But that might be a concern if it's an actual user of the system that has maybe access the account from a shared computer, right? So that could be something I need to do some education around. That is a potential concern, right? So that's definitely something that you could do as part of just an employee review to look specifically at a user's activity during a certain time frame. You are limited to that 1 month date range, so that's something to keep in mind, that you might want to pull multiple different searches and then combine the results in Excel, or just kind of take a snapshot of looking at 1 month as an example of that user's activity. I could also see, different IP addresses that I logged in from. Something I want to go into with the MAR, so I'm kind of skipping back to looking at modules. Probably one of the most common support issues that we get is somebody says, my staff was working in the MAR, and they are sure that they've saved it, or that they've entered data, but when I go to look at the MAR, I'm not seeing that. So I don't know if you guys have ever been in that situation, if any of you are using the MAR, but something to think about there. So when I'm documenting in the MAR, I could go through, I could do all my stuff in quick mode here, and I could just go back to the dashboard. So I did not save, and I should have. So if I were to go back and look at that MAR, none of those entries are on there. If I go to activity tracking, let's see how that shows up. Okay, so I was viewing the MAR. However, I did not save the MAR. So again, that's just another example of a way that you can use this to troubleshoot. So this is such a good tool for provider admins who, you guys may get issues escalated to you from users facing difficulty with some area of the system. So here I can see, I didn't save, and so that's why the entries didn't save. Okay. So I think that's about all I'm going to cover as far as activity tracking. I'm going to go ahead and move into some of those kind of related sections now. So as you guys work in the system, you will see that beside many of the modules, you have these sections called archive. We get a lot of questions about these, like, what exactly is an archive? Does data get archived per se? And so most of really the answer is yes and no. So what the archive does is basically keeps track of the previous versions of a form. So when I go into a form, I'll just pull up some ISP data. Okay. If I pull this form up, I have the update role, and so I can go ahead and go in and update something. So I'm going to update a score here. So now the current version of this form is different, right? So what I'm seeing on here is not what was originally selected for that particular score. I actually changed it. So when I go to the top of the form, I can see that form was last updated by me just about a minute ago. And if I go to the update history, this link gives me a search of the archive, right? So I can see I'm the only one who's updated this form, so that is considered as me archiving it. So if I go in and look at this, the score for the second task used to be no, and now it is yes. And so I can actually see those details when I look at the update history. Different update histories for different modules may vary, so in this case it doesn't highlight what was changed. In some cases it actually does, which is pretty cool. So basically how that relates to the archive is if I go back in to the ISP data section and I go to archive, I can search for a certain date range of when forms were archived. Let's go ahead and do today. And so there is that record that I had archived that form. So if I look at it from here, I'm going to see a read-only version of what it used to be before it was what it is now. Okay. So that's what the archive is. That's also going to be available for certain administrative things. So for example, super roles. Super roles often are going to get changed as you roll out more modules, as you learn more about the system and tweak who has what kind of access. So an archive for super roles. Let's see, it looks like Michelle changed the parent super role. So it used to just have these three things. I guess she added something new, so I could go look at the parent super role and see what was changed. A little bit more about update history. So I showed you how it looks on ISP data. Some of our modules are going to get a little bit more detailed than that. So ISP plan is going to be an example of that. So I'm going to search for a particular plan here. And I'll go ahead and go to the update history here. So this one looks a little different, right? I have several different archivals, and it gives me this old version and new version option. So I'm going to compare this old version, which was on the 25th, with its new version on the 8th. And then down here I can actually show the difference. And so you can actually see that it crosses out certain sections and highlights the changes in green as things are modified. And so I could actually go through and hone in on what the specific changes were. So it looks like a new external attachment was added. I can see certain, changes were made to the change form. So that's kind of nice. You can actually get a little bit more detail in some of these. And again, this is part of the archive. So this is an archived version of this person's individual support plan. All right. So we've gone through activity tracking. We've looked at archives. We've looked at update history. Last thing we'll go ahead and take a look at in terms of monitoring user activity is the message audit. So message audit is tied to the super admin role. So people who have super admin role are able to do this. So the message audit allows you to look for messages that were sent by a particular sender or a particular recipient. And you can look at that within a 1 month date range. So I'm going to pick on Jeremy. So I'm going to see messages that Jeremy has sent. Okay, and so here is a list. All these ones that are test, I can tell he did these during an on-site training. So if I open this up, I can see he sent a message to Katie. I can see the date and time that he did so, and I can actually see the content of the message. They were sending those, yeah. They were in separate rooms during an on-site. So I can also download a PDF of messages if I need to. So this could be helpful if you need to look into a particular user's activity within SCOM. There's something concerning. You are able as a super admin to audit that activity. All right, so that's everything that I had for you guys today. I'll go ahead and take a look at the questions. I'm pretty sure that Jeremy was able to get to all of those. Okay, and it looks like we really didn't get too many questions. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. Thank you all so much for attending, and have a great rest of your day.